Greetings, Craddock here. Today we're going to be talking about Firewall in Diablo 2 Resurrected as a skill. We're going to be discussing the bug fix, the DPS increase related to this skill, why it's such a great skill for overall play, both early game and mid game and in game. Firewall spell mechanics, pros and cons of using the spell. Skill points, whether you're using Firewall as an early leveling method or later as a primary or secondary hybrid skill. And then Firewall stats, gear progression, options as you, basically the starter build. We'll talk about the starter build. One thing I noticed, because Firewall was the first skill I leveled with in D2R, is that it just was super smooth. It was dealing a lot of damage, and I was just having fun. Little did I know this extra damage was not because Firewall was just a good pick. It's also because the damage has actually increased. There were bug fixes upon releasing D2R. Between D2LOD and D2LOR, there's a difference. Firewall has had fixes to its collision, to its orientation, having issues, so that now it deals higher DPS. So the first issue in D2LOD was with DPS from the Firewall based on its orientation. Firewalls that were perfectly vertical or horizontal to the screen were significantly worse as compared to those that were diagonal, which obviously doesn't feel good because you have to play a certain way to maximize your DPS. So I think it's great that they fixed this. And now in D2R, both orientations deal roughly, though still not exactly the same level of DPS. In Diablo 2 LOD, pyres, which are basically just a tile that has been lit up by a firewall, also had collision issues with registering if a mob was located in the pyre. D2R fixed this issue. Mobs now seem to correctly register if they're in the pyre, regardless of mob size or position in regards to a firewall. And as you can see here, a display of how big mobs are. An example, you can see a size 1, size 2, and size 3. Size 3 obviously has many more tiles with which to collide with a potential firewall. And this is actually where I think when the developers went to fix the issue, fix the bug, they not only fixed it, but perhaps mobs, and this is conjecture right now, perhaps mobs are taking more damage because they are colliding more. The reality is it's been fixed. It's just, it may not have been fixed the way we were expecting, you know. So we're waiting on clarification from the developers, obviously, to see whether this is intended or whether this is going to be changed in the future. But at least for now, you can go and enjoy Firewall as, in my mind, it was intended to be, because it's still a fire skill, so it's not like you can use it for everything. There are a lot of fire immunes in the game, you know, so I don't know. But testers have been noticing at the current time, D2R Firewall has about 1.5 to 1.8 times higher DPS. So I have tested many leveling builds with Sorceress in D2R at this point. I've leveled a lot of Sorceresses. And I've tried Charge Bolt, Nova, Fireball. However, none of these feels as smooth or as good as using Firewall. And there are a few reasons for this. To explain why, first we have to take a look at what Firewall is actually doing, mechanics-wise. Basically, when you cast Firewall on the field of battle, it will spawn what are known as Firewall Maker missiles, and these will go out at 90 degrees from the position of the character at the time of spawn and move in different directions fairly rapidly across the screen, which is great because it covers terrain quickly, right? And these spawn what are known as pyres, or basically tiles that have been lit up with fire on the ground as they move. And each pyre has the ability to register with a target that is on top of it or has traversed it to say, hey, you should be taking dot damage from firewall, because you're on top of me. And firewall deals damage every frame, and there are 25 frames in a second, remember, for Diablo 2. This is really good because it means the damage that enemy targets are taking is very smooth, and it's very, it's kind of like poison damage, it's very fluid, right? So some other benefits of Firewall is that it's aimable by the caster. One of the good things I like about the skill is you direct the spell. Some spells, contra to this, such as like Nova or Blizzard, these other spells can be cast in the general area of the screen, but cannot be aimed precisely. By that I mean you can cast Nova, but it's not gonna, necessarily target a specific enemy. Same with Blizzard, you can cast it and it hits a large AoE, but targets still need to move through it. There's no guarantee that you're actually going to hit a target with Blizzard, right? Whereas Firewall, spawning it on the ground will hit the target that's underneath it. So that aspect is very nice. Another point, Firewall can grow to be very long. As you level up and you level the skill, and more points you put in it, the yardage increases, covering multiple screens worth eventually, which is quite nice. An example here is a level 30 Firewall. The horizontal spawn is 53 yards and the diagonal is 75 yards, which is huge. That's a lot of distance. This means the area of effect, technically, of a Firewall can exceed that of a lot of other skills, given the opportunity to spawn. And one of the downsides that we'll go later on is that the Firewall Maker missiles can actually terminate if they encounter impassable environmental objects, which is a big downside, obviously, but means that as a player, you have to watch where you're spawning your Firewall. It requires a little bit more skill to get positioned correctly, right? So Firewall has what's known as a timeout or a GCD. The delay in seconds for this timeout is 1.4 seconds or 35 frames. The duration, however, that the tiles are lit, that Firewall stays on the ground, is 3.56 seconds or 89 frames. This is a very long duration, and it means that even though we have this long lockout period or this timeout, this GCD that keeps us from recasting Firewall for a little while, we're able to place multiple Firewall casts on the field of battle, which means it's also one of the safer, more defensive spells in the Sorceress's spellbook, flat out melting enemies when they aggro and try and run at you. Another option is to stack up the Firewall casts one on top of each other. And if a tile is lit up by multiple Firewall Maker missiles, basically multiple pyres, it will register on a target that, hey, you need to be affected by both of these Firewall casts, and the DPS will increase from these multiple casts, which is huge benefit for the skill. Means you can melt bosses who are not moving around a lot. If you can keep them in the same position, you can just stack up Firewall and then deal even more damage. Firewall also has excellent range. As long as the Sorceress has a clear line of sight to the target, meaning there are no obstructions between the caster and the target, then the missiles will spawn at the cursor upon cast. Additionally, if a target is moving off screen, the Sorceress can nameplate lock or otherwise recast Firewall even though the target moves out of visual range. This is more useful for PvP, but can also be useful every once in a while for PvE when you're battling difficult targets. Firewall is very mana efficient. It can kill many different enemies in a single cast, meaning the player can leverage the mana per kill affix to great effect. Mana spent is also fairly reserved because it is also a timed spell. Therefore, the average mana spent is limited in regards to a lot of other spells. Firewall also has a very low skill point investment requirement, and this is one of the most appealing things about this skill. You get damage increases from Fire Mastery, obviously, but you also have skills that synergize with Firewall, and those include Warmth and Inferno. However, since Inferno only gives 1% per base point spent in the skill, usually players don't invest in this unless they're like really hardcore going after like a pure Firewall build. This means you only have to worry about Firewall, Fire Mastery, and Warmth. And even then, investing into Fire Mastery and Warmth, those don't have to be fully leveled to get a really decent, really good damage Firewall going for the game, which is really appealing. Some of the cons, why you might not like Firewall or might want to avoid it. As I already mentioned, Firewall missiles will collide with objects and they will despawn, meaning they will stop traversing, which can mean you have a shorter Firewall than intended, especially if you spawn your Firewall right next to a pillar or a wall or a stone. It can be detrimental. However, as I mentioned, as a player, as long as you're spawning these in the correct location, then you should be fine. However, it does mean that certain maps, such as Bale's Throne Room, can be a little bit harder to engage enemies in. However, like open maps, contra to this is that open maps such as the cow level can be easier to play around. The GCD, or the timer, as mentioned, does lock you out of casting your ability, and if you happen to miss one of your Firewall casts or not place it correctly, it can feel really bad because enemies such as dolls that move quickly and attack you rapidly can get in there if you miss a cast and then maybe kill you. However, there's a workaround, is just to learn to play better against certain opponents, learn the maps, that sort of thing. The timer GCD is also horrendous if enemies spread out in such a way that you cannot hit more than one at a time, and they're also like ranged mobs that don't like to run into your Firewall. It can mean that you have to, spend extra time just casting Firewall again and again. Compared to, say, like Fireball, other skills that the Sorceress has, this might mean in those circumstances, Firewall will not be better. However, there are other circumstances where, due to the length of the Firewall, you can kill more enemies than those other skills would. One big negative here with Firewall is also that Firewall does not proc hit recovery on enemy targets. So you usually will have to find some other means of slowing or just making sure that your Firewall deals enough damage to prevent enemies from getting through the Firewall. Or, alternately, that you can survive enough hits before enemies kill you. Mana burners in the current state of the game are really dangerous. Just one or two melee attacks from a mana burner will deplete your entire mana pool instantly, and you'll have to recover it also near instantly to be able to teleport or recast Firewall to defend yourself. However, this can be problematic because Firewall costs 45 to 60 mana for most players, depending on its skill level. However, the best workaround to this is we do have Rejuvenation Potions, which are instant, so just keep a stock of Rejuvenation Potions, and you should be able to press these and then either teleport out or recast your Firewall to kill the enemies that are damaging you. Another con is fire as an element is just horrendous in the game because there are so many fire immunes in Hell difficulty. The good news is because of the low, point investment, usually we can hybrid Firewall with a different skill. And Firewall is still a great ability against non-fire immunes, against even bosses. Bosses melt against Firewall. So it's one of the main appeals of the ability. And there are also a lot of places in the game you can still farm and have a good time. It's a great ability all the way through Nightmare, minus Chaos Sanctuary perhaps, and it's great for killing bosses and farming cows. This makes it ideal for placement in hybrid builds that tend to struggle with killing bosses, such as with Frozen Aura or Nova, for example. So enough of that, let's go have some fun in-game, showing some of the techniques that you can use with Firewall. This is my currently level 78 Sorceress that I've just been using Nightmare Bale to level up with. So, let's go ahead and just hop in the game and we'll show a quick couple of techniques that you can use with the Firewall. Firewall can be used defensively or offensively in different ways. So you see the snakes here. So we're going to put up a Firewall in between us and the targets, and as they charge forward, one method is you will just kill them as they come towards you. That's the simplest method, of course, because all you have to do is click on the target that's in front of you. Now, a little bit more advanced is you see these snakes on the bottom of the screen. You can actually cast around a corner if you want to, and I kind of missed there, but you can see here you can still kill targets around a corner if you want to. And as you can see, I can actually kill them at the very bottom of the screen, so very far away. So another technique you can do is if you want to get your Firewall down the hallway, you can cast it perpendicular to your, to the side of your character, and it will actually just go all the way up the hallway. And as you saw there, I killed the elite with that. So that's another method that you can use. You can also use your mercenary as an anchor. So whatever they are attacking, just cast on your mercenary. That's a good technique as well. They will kind of tank for you. Another method is just to use yourself as the tank. So your mercenary can be killing other things, and then you will take a little damage, but you can actually just kill enemies that are in front of you and clear the screen while your mercenary is also clearing the other side of the screen. It's also a decent way to do it. You will take damage doing that, though. And then there are some techniques special for Bale's throne room. In particular, standing on his throne tends to be very good for a lot of the later packs in Bale's waves. And you'll see that in some of the footage that I put up a little bit later. You can also nameplate lock is another technique, which basically just means using your cursor on top of an enemy, and if they're running away from you, you can, as long as you're right-click casting on them, it will still recast. I can't really display that here because we don't have that type of mob available and I'm killing things too quickly, but that's another technique as well. In general, that's just Firewall, just placing it on the field of battle. You can see I can put up to 2 casts at any one time. Just create a buffer zone. Like if enemies are coming at me from both sides of the screen, just creating a crisscross diagonal in front of me is also very nice. Protects me from dolls. This is a very good technique to use against dolls because they run at you and they run at you very quickly. And when the doll dies, it does like a mini corpse explosion, but it deals like, 60% of your health and damage in hell, which is obscene, so just protecting yourself from the dolls can be useful at times. And against bosses, like I mentioned before, just stacking up 2 firewalls on top of one another will increase the DPS and let you kill them insanely quickly. That's a good method to use for bosses. Here's an example of an obstacle. You see this pillar here. You see the firewall missile terminates at the obstacle there and only continues on until it hits another obstacle, which is the wall. So as you can see, positioning is very key when you're playing with Firewall, and I hope you learn to enjoy and love and play around the different aspects that Firewall can offer.